Welcome to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. This episode continues our summer series about Forged in the Dark games. I'm your MC, Rach.
And I'm your co-MC, Rich. Tonight we are joined by our guest, Ben Nielsen of Bandit Camp. Hey Ben, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on.
Okay Ben, why don't you tell us about your first experience with Forged in the Dark games?
Several years ago, I just finished up a campaign, and then me and my gaming group wanted to try something new, so I pitched Mouse Guard to them, and they shot that down. So my backup was Blades in the Dark. But I'm not a big fan of running pre-made settings. I like to do my own stuff. So what we did was we took Blades, and then we ran kind of a Western with it.
Oh, cool.
A kind of alternative history Western. And I thought, like, all these outlaws and gangs and stuff, that would kind of work. And it went pretty well. It was cool. We played it for about 12 sessions, and they were running around the Midwest selling opium. So it was a pretty fun time.
Nice. Why don't we jump on over here and talk about setting, position, and effect.
Setting, position, and effect.
In setting, position, and effect, our guest will talk about an aspect of Forged in the Dark play that they are passionate about and that they want to highlight. And I actually reached out specifically, Ben, to see if you would be interested in talking about Devil's Bargains, which is a big part of Forged in the Dark. And you said yes, thank goodness.
I think it's pretty unique, Devil's Bargains. You don't really see this kind of mechanic in other games. And it gives everyone at the table a lot of control over the story, really. Mm-hmm. It reinforces that kind of writer's room mentality to play, that you can just introduce things on this meta level because that'll be fun to do. And it's a disadvantage for the players, so by accepting it, they're getting that extra bonus die and to help the thing that they want to do now, but to be hobbled by it later. So it's really unique. I've found that players really love it too. But it can be challenging, right, for GMs to create cool Devil's Bargains. Not just the GM, the players too. And knowing when to ask for them, when to offer them. There's kind of a fine line there.
For our listeners who might be jumping into the summer series on this episode, Ben, can you summarize very quickly what a Devil's Bargain is specifically?
Yeah, so let's say a player is about to do something and they want to climb up a wall or whatever they're doing, right, to sneak into a tower. And they always want an extra die to roll to increase their chances of successes. So what the GM can do is the GM can offer up a Devil's Bargain. What it is something else bad is going to happen. For example, they are climbing up this tower, and the GM can say, okay, yeah, you can take a bonus die right here, but you're going to have to agree that the sun is starting to rise. You're at the end of the night now, and it's getting brighter, and people are going to start moving around really soon. So maybe I'm going to start a clock. You got a 4-segment clock, and I'm going to tick away at that, and at the end of that clock, the sun will rise. How does that sound? And then the player kind of weighs it, and they're like, do I want to be facing off against this ticking clock now? Or am I just going to roll my dice and take the lower chance of success? So it puts the player in that position where they need to weigh the benefit versus the risk, or how bad the consequence might be. Mm-hmm. I guess that's kind of the point, is that fine line right there is that the player needs to think about it. The GM has to... You don't want to just be giving free dice, because what you want in the game basically is for there to be a lot of partial successes. You don't want successes all the time. So just giving out all these free dice, it's going to make the players kind of too powerful, and not enough interesting drama is going to be happening around them. But they don't want that. The players just want to be able to do the thing that they do and get away with it. So the GM has to really choose their spot to offer up this consequence that sounds fun, but it's going to be a thorn in their side, but it's just not bad enough to say no. You want players to grimace when they say yes. They're like, okay, I'll take it. And then take their dice and roll.
What in your mind makes a Devil's Bargain great? Is it a really strong consequence? Is it a really evocative consequence?
The best ones tend to be stuff that's going to happen later, or it's happening off screen. But introducing more chaos into the scene now only works if it's really, really interesting now, or if things have been stale up to this point. And that's also a great way for the GM to mix up scenes. Some of the best ones are things that they're going to have to deal with later, you can even make them pretty bad in that case. It's like this really bad thing that you're going to have to deal with later, but because it's later and not now, they'll say yes usually because they don't really think about what it actually means to be dealing with that. If they have to deal with it right now or very soon, they'll probably say no. So you're kind of tricking them, playing on that psychology of, it's like a debt that you're going to have to pay. And they're like, I'll do it, like, because they don't have to deal with it right now. They get the bonus right now, and that feels good for them.
Sneaky.
Do you find most devil's bargains to be situational, faction level stuff, or do you make devil's bargains that are personal to that particular player character in the moment? Like, I'm going to introduce your long-lost aunt or something like that.
That's a pretty good one. I like attacking things that they love is good. And I think players like that too, to be put in that hard spot, their characters in that hard spot, and then they're going to have to deal with it. Like if someone's carrying around this weapon or something that they really love, right? You got a sniper and he's got his sniper rifle. Well, attack that sniper rifle, take it out of their hands. And by giving the player the choice, they buy into it too. They're telling you that, yeah, that's cool. I want to deal with being a sniper without a sniper rifle for a while. If you want to make it like player focused, that's good. Is that introducing a really rough situation for them that they will buy into. And in the same way, it doesn't even have to be the GM. You can ask the player. If they're like, oh man, I really want another die to roll here, ask them, like, what's a good devil's bargain? What's something that you want to deal with that's really rough for you? And they will be harsher than the GM ever is. When you give the players the choice, they hammer themselves. They're like, maybe my sniper rifle totally breaks. Like, whoa, it doesn't have to be that bad. Like, you could have just dropped it. And they're like, no, it's broken. Like, okay. Players will really, not everyone, but I think players will really hammer themselves. As soon as they realize that all of these Forge in the Dark games, they're not games meant to be won. They're just stories to be told. And the Devil's Bargain gives people like a really good chance to tell the kind of tough story that you might see on TV shows or something, right? Mm-hmm. Characters struggling against adversity.
So you mentioned asking the player who's being targeted what kind of devil's bargain they want in that situation. Do you ever ask the rest of the players at the table to make suggestions?
Absolutely. Here's a common pattern that I always found in my games. It's, well, first, players don't ask for devil's bargains when they're new because they don't really know that they have that permission to do that, right? Mm-hmm. It's taken them a little while to settle into the writer's room mentality. Everyone's kind of involved on this meta level. And also engaging with the mechanics that they can prompt it. They can even say like, hey, can I get a devil's bargain here? This bad thing happens and then I get an extra die? They can just ask the GM anytime they want to. Mm-hmm. Other players could say, hey, this would be a really good devil's bargain. And they can just jump in and suggest it. But what really happens is the GM usually is doing it. I just think the GM kind of interfaces with the mechanics a little bit more. They're more present in the GM's mind. So what I often do is I'll say, would you like a devil's bargain here? And then that just activates the table. Everyone starts thinking about it. Usually I don't even have a good idea. And they'll be like, oh, yeah, let's hear one. I'll go, okay, what do you guys think? And then they start throwing it around the table and talking about it. And then usually I ignore it and I use that time to think of a cool one myself. And Forge in the Dark games are really, I think they're really taxing for the GM because you're doing this nonstop simulation of the fiction. And you're setting position and effect and determining consequences. And I think it's quite a bit more taxing than, like, PBTA games are probably like that too, but where like the GM is just always doing this fictional simulation. So I've found that kind of creatively taxing. So throwing it around the table like gives you a break, a little reprieve from that to catch your breath and hear other ideas. And then I'm usually kind of trying to come up with stuff on my own while they're throwing out ideas.
What are some things to avoid with a devil's bargain? What's a crap devil's bargain, Ben?
Harm. That's always the most boring consequence. Yeah, and in most Forge in the Dark games and Blades in the Dark, the base game, there's kind of mechanical penalties that come with harm, and that doesn't feel good. Players will always say no. It feels pretty boring. You have to make sure it does hurt. Something that they don't really care about, and they accept. You'll see that as you GM, right? You'll throw out a devil's bargain and they'll be like, I'll take it. And like as soon as you say it, they're just like, yeah, that's great, because it doesn't really affect them very much, and then they're just getting the extra bonus die. So you don't really want that reaction, because then that means that devil's bargain's kind of boring. Yeah, but if they emphatically are saying like, yeah, that sounds cool, that's good. That's a good reaction. But my favorite reaction is the grimace. They're like, they got to think about it, and they don't want to say yes. And then you want them to say no sometimes too. And they can come back. They can say like, well, that's a little too harsh. How about this? And then sometimes it doesn't happen. And I think that's a good line. Maybe 3 out of 4 times they're accepting it, but 1 out of 4, it's just a little too much and they're not going to accept it. And then they roll and they fail and they're like, I should have taken it. Or they roll and they succeed and they're like, see, I didn't even need it. And then that feels good too. It's really rewarding.
Interesting.
Taking notes?
Devil's bargains are also a great way to introduce things that the GM wants to see in the scene. Well, GMs can just they can do anything they want, right? They can just inflict consequences on players at any point that makes sense fictionally. You don't have to wait for rolls. You can just do it. You can just say, now this thing appears and you have to deal with that because that's the fiction and that's what would have happened. But it doesn't always feel good to do that. So by giving the players a little bonus to introduce the thing that you want to see happen, it's a good way for the GM to kind of change the stories in bad ways for the players and make them feel good about it because they buy into it as well. But that's also one thing that you have to be really careful about is don't introduce something that you think is really cool and want to see happen and then they say no. Because then you can't introduce it anymore, right? It feels like you're cheating them if the next consequence you introduce it anyway. So, it's a little bit risky to do that.
That's good.
Yeah, I think the Devil's Bargain is one of the best ways to kind of teach that meta channel to players, right? That they have permission to be doing these things that are traditionally GM jobs. So it's a good way to open up the table. This is your game too. We're all doing this together.
All right, Ben, I think it's time for us to go on to the next segment, Progress Clock.
Progress Clock.
In Progress Clock, our guest describes and talks about their Forged in the Dark game. Ben, tell us a little bit more about Wicked Ones. What's it about?
Well, in Wicked Ones, you play as a group of monsters, just typical fantasy monsters you can imagine, orcs and kobolds and goblins and stuff, who are working together to build a dungeon. And through play, your dungeon grows over time, and then you raid the overworld and head out on the surface and hit some targets and do some pillaging. And then adventurers catch wind of you, and then they come knocking on your door. And then the dungeon is there to defend against these adventurers. Dungeon Keeper is the easy touchstone there, just to kind of understand what the game's about. It's Dungeon Keeper, the tabletop role-playing game.
Neat. That is a very succinct way to make it clear. And for folks who aren't aware, Dungeon Keeper is a video game from many years ago that is very fun.
It was interesting when you were asking me how I got into Forged in the Dark games, right? And the first time I played Blades, I had this idea for this game in my mind for 10 years. I always thought it would be a cool game to make. And it was just kind of rattling around and stuff, and I had never really landed on how I would do it, or because it seemed like it was going to be a complex beast or something, right? But the first session I played Blades in the Dark, after we finished that session, I knew I was going to make this game. And I started then. It was just after that, I was like, okay, I guess I really need to learn this system because this is great. It's like Scoundrels and Duskwall. It's basically, you're already playing these monsters, So all of the mechanics lined up really nicely with the way I thought the game should flow. And it was narrative enough and not mechanically complex, or mechanically kind of gritty. I didn't really want that kind of game where you're rolling against their armor and taking off hit points. Not really like that. It's mostly just I wanted to be telling these cool stories in the dungeon, and then the system is prompting you to tell cooler stories.
Question about, you said you're playing groups of minions, so let's say I'm a player, and we'll find out more in the AP, but I just want to hit it now.
Yep.
I would play a group of characters, not just one.
Not exactly, no. You play as your PC, and that's one. You have your one kobold shaman. That's the PC. But then this group of PCs make up the leadership in the dungeon, right? So they're kind of like the big bad evil guy council, right? And then your main PC can have kind of a sub PC called minions. This is the leader, but then the minions, they are a pack. They come in packs of 2 or 3 or 4. And the reason for that is I didn't want players to care about the minions too much. They're just fodder. They're supposed to get their heads lopped off by adventurers because that's what adventurers do. And that was the hard part about designing the game, is that the adventurers have to enter the dungeon and they have to get all the way through the grinder to the end. Sometimes they might not. They might get stopped. But they're supposed to be destroying all of these creatures and minions and stuff inside of the first level of the dungeon, because that's what adventurers do. And then there's a big face-off at the end. And minions serve that role. So you basically play as these 2 PCs, the main one and the small pack of minions.
Okay. But there are multiple players. Like, I'm playing two
Yep.
PCs, and one's a group of folks, but there could be like 3 other people at the table
Yep.
with me and the
Like,
GM.
the
right?
sweet spot's 3 or 4 players, and then
Okay,
it's 3 or 4
okay.
players, and then they'll have minions, and then they will also have responsibility over narrating different sections of the dungeon. And you write those on your sheet. So when you build a trap and you put it into the dungeon, you write it on your sheet, and you become the person that rolls for that trap and narrates it. Honestly, it's really complex, and there's a huge learning curve to the game. And I think that's intentional almost. Like, I wanted it to be this big complex beast with all of these different systems that are kind of working together to simulate the different parts of the dungeon, right? And like, the more interesting stuff there is to do, the more the dungeon itself can come to life. And I wanted it to kind of feel different, right? Like, minions feel a little bit different than creatures, and those feel a little bit different than traps. And then there's tricks and locks and stuff inside the dungeon. And all of these things feel a little bit different. And the players have responsibility over each one.
Okay, that helps a lot.
So there's like a session 0 and session 1 set up in the book that's essentially like tutorial mode that explains it little by little as you build this dungeon together, the very first part of it, to help players get all the information they need.
Definitely am getting a supervillain vibe already, though.
I think a lot of people balk a little bit about playing evil characters, but as soon as they start playing, like, they get really into it. So they're like, I don't know if I want to play evil characters. And then, like, suddenly they're like, I'm cutting their heads off. Yeah. Like, so it's like, whoa, dial it back.
What mechanics are different in Wicked Ones versus Blades in the Dark?
It's a long list, to be honest. I took the system and I rewrote it, all of it, from scratch in my own wording. So there's nothing copied from the SRD. And through that process, lots of little things changed. I mean, I've heard it described as Blades 1.5 or something. It's like this other fork of it. And they're not really compatible anymore. Like, you can't take a Wicked One's character and play it in Blades. So biggest things would be compels, that your characters have these impulses. For example, they can be reckless, and the GM can compel you to say, like, you're reckless, so you're not going to wait. You're just going to jump in and do it now. And then you have to do it, or you have to spend stress to not do it. So the GM can force that in, like, kind of a hard push towards these bad actions. But if you follow through, you get what's called a dark heart, and it's a meta currency that you can spend later to add 1d to one of your rolls. The compel mechanic is pretty similar to the way that fate works in their aspects. Your character is this kind of person, so I'm going to push you to follow through with being that kind of character. Player agency is really big in Blades, but the compel mechanic takes that from them, and it gives it to the GM. And it's saying, like, no, your character has to do this, or you will lose stress. What do you want to do? That's the biggest difference, I suppose. Another big difference that a lot of people coming from Blades will notice is when you resist in Blades, you roll your attributes, but in Wicked Ones, you roll your actions. So the attributes themselves aren't really used, that you just pick a specific action. So resists have been reworked quite a bit. Yeah, that's pretty different.
What's your favorite move or mechanic and why?
I've just talked about compels a lot, and not to just keep talking about the same thing, but it is my favorite. You're playing these evil characters, and you want to be doing evil things and kind of stupid things. You don't always want to be acting efficiently, but you're in a group of players and you have a plan together. Let's go and raid this place and steal this thing. And you're going there, and then suddenly you're like, I'm going to, like, go off and do my own little thing. And they're like, why are you doing that again? Or something, right? And it derails the plot. So there's always that pushback. But what I've noticed is that if you get meta currency for doing the stupid thing, nobody cares anymore. Because then that can help you accomplish the goal later. And then they also want that meta currency too. And they want permission, kind of social permission, to be doing these stupid things. The GM can compel you, but you can also compel yourself. To say, like, my character would be doing this now. Does that work? And then say to the GM, and the GM will okay it. Like, yeah, that's perfect. You can take the dark heart. You can get the meta currency. And I think that concept is super important for playing these evil characters, because they need that moment. And I talk about this in the book, but the question comes up, like, why not be evil and crazy all the time? But it's because if you do that, it gets old. But the compel isolates it and spotlights it. It makes this cool scene that's just about that for this short time, and then back to the plan.
Get your moment in the weird spotlight, and then back in line and working with the Council of Doom to further your collective goals.
Yeah. And then, like, just to go a little bit further with that, as soon as you're stressed out, like you've used all of your stress, then you're automatically compelled again, and you have to go through with it. So what happens is play stops, and then you go around the table, and each person says, I think your character would do this now. So let's say that your impulse was something like, we could just use reckless again. You're really, really, really reckless. So every player will say, like, the most reckless thing that you could do right now is da-da-da-da. And then the player has the final choice. They can take one of these suggestions, or during that time, they create their own. And it like really, 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 really focuses on that character's evil, bad, stupid stuff. And it creates cool moments.
This sounds really fun. Well, Ben, you have got me excited about this Wicked Ones. I would love it if we could jump on over to the score. Maybe you could run us a quick little demo?
Yeah, sounds awesome.
It's time for the score.
What we're going to be doing is we're going to run an invasion. Some adventurers are going to be coming into your dungeon, and I've already kind of set up the dungeon. It has several rooms. There are caverns and stuff, and there's like a river running through the middle of it, and there's a lava waterfall like hitting the river, and all of this stuff would have been generated through play. The players themselves would be deciding it, or the GM would have rolled discoveries to see what you found underground while you're digging out the dungeon. For our sake, just to make this quick, I've already went ahead and set all that up. So what you guys are going to be doing, first of all, though, is that we're going to kind of brainstorm a couple of traps to drop into this dungeon to find like kind of good spots for where those traps might go. We're also going to brainstorm a couple of doors and locks, and the doors and locks will help control the flow of the adventurers coming through the dungeon. Use them to seal off sensitive areas or to push adventurers onto the path that you want. Then finally, we're also going to detail a couple of creatures. These are non-intelligent beasts that lair inside of your dungeon. Something like gelatinous cube, for example. Then I've set up a couple of minion packs for you guys to use. We're not going to be playing PCs, but we'll be playing as these minion packs. I think, Rich, you're going to be playing as some orc brawlers. 2 orc brawlers, big orcs. What kind of weapon do you think they would have? What would they be carrying?
Ooh, that is a great question. I think they are carrying axes.
Okay, yeah.
Battle axes.
That's pretty classic. And Rach, you're going to be playing as some kobold pyromancers, so doing like fire magic.
Excellent.
Give me a quick view of what they look like. It's a group of 3 of them.
I think they wear chainmail armor that has clearly been singed and accidentally set on fire while learning fire magic.
That's good.
There's a remains of like some leather that used to hold it together. It's all singed and charcoaly now.
Cool.
One's still smoking.
Let's go ahead and set up a couple of... Well, let's start with locks and doors, right? So each of you is going to decide one door that we're going to place within this dungeon. And we're using Roll20 here, but I'll try to describe it. But I've already drawn a line that kind of shows the optimal path, and this pink line here, this optimal path through the dungeon where the adventurers are going to want to go. And what they're wanting to do is go into your front door, make their way through the dungeon, and go down the stairway into your sanctum. And that's where the PCs would usually be waiting for the big bad evil guy fight at the end of the dungeon. So you want to keep them out of that. But no matter what, they will push towards that. So you can put locks in their path to kind of push them off to different sections and stuff. So let's just choose a couple of places within this dungeon, and each of you can put a lock somewhere. Rach, I guess you go first. What do you think might be a good idea?
Oh, I definitely want to put a lock where the fountain is. I do see there's I guess I'm going to have to describe this to our listeners. There's a big round room labeled fountain, dim/quiet, with a little alcove to the side where a creature can dwell. I think that exit that's meant to go towards the sanctum is going to have the lock on it.
That's pretty cool. Yep. Yeah, right here.
Yeah, that one right there.
Maybe it's good to talk about this. Wicked One's a very visual game, and it was important to me that people actually draw a dungeon, and they draw it together on a piece of paper. And when I was asked to come on this podcast and maybe run this little actual play, I was like, how can a podcast see what's going on? So we'll just try to describe stuff, right? But we can see it together, and we're interacting with the dungeon together, but you're not going to be able to see that. So we'll try to describe it. You need to choose for your lock, you need to choose the door materials, what's the door made of, and then the lock mechanism. And these have really no effect. They're just story prompts for later when you roll it, and then it'll help you kind of narrate through what's happening there. So if you can just choose one from each of those lists.
For door materials, it's crystal, and for lock mechanism, It's puzzle.
Okay.
And can I describe what I'm imagining?
Please do.
I imagine it's a really obtuse sliding puzzle. You know, like those little puzzles you got, well, I got as favors in party bags where you slid them together and if you put the panels in the right space, it makes a picture.
Yep.
It's one of those, but it's all crystal. And to look at the picture, you have to kind of shift your position to make sure the light's hitting this crystal. It's really obtuse and obnoxious.
Okay, cool. All right. Rich, how about you? What kind of door? Where are you going to put it?
I would like to put a door at the other end of the rope bridge. So there's this river and a lava fall. There's the rapids. Very cool. Basically, river obstacle, but there's a rope bridge over it. I want a door right on the other end of the rope bridge.
This one?
Yeah, exactly.
Let me just really quick talk about what might happen here. As the adventurers are coming in here, they might hit this lock, and they're going to get pushed back and go another way. And in doing so, they might never encounter this door that Rach just put down. So if your door is effective, it's going to push them away from it, and they might never encounter that door.
Huh.
Yeah, and then this kind of interaction is important for players to think about. Controlling the flow through the dungeon to push them away from areas that are sensitive and towards areas that you want them to go. You can do that, and what it does is it really makes sure that they're going to have two chances to be pushed down this other pathway. And that's okay. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that that might happen.
Well, with that in mind, I think doing it on the east end of Tier 2 creature, basically a doorway before they would reach the library, so that I can force them to go towards Rage's door.
That's a good idea, because as these couple of rooms, you have a library, you have a spawning chamber over here. These rooms are Tier 3 rooms, and that's just the lingo for the game. But what that means is that when adventurers reach them, they loot those rooms, and they will regain hearts. Heart is a measure of their health and perseverance to get through the dungeon. So the adventurers want to hit those rooms. They like it. So putting a door over here to kind of block this path is not a bad idea. What's the door made of?
It's made of iron.
Okay. And what's the lock mechanism?
It's a really heavy object that we moved there ourselves. Took a while.
What's the object?
It is a giant stone.
Okay.
It's on the other side. Nobody can go to the library that way now. Such a good door.
Okay, cool. Let's do traps. Rich, let's start with you. Where's a good spot to put a trap?
The purpose with a trap is to hurt them, not necessarily to keep them from going a certain way, right?
Yep. Traps directly harm them. And everything is measured in hearts, and the traps roll against them, and then they slash the hearts. At the end of that, it means that that adventurer is out of the scene. So, and what that means, it really depends on what the players want it to mean. They could run away. They could die. They could just be trapped down inside. For example, if it's a pit trap, then you roll and it ticks their hearts a couple of times. It means they fell down the trap, but they climbed out. So it set them back and it cost them kind of energy and they're tired, but they eventually will move past it. It could also be, a big spike that stuck them in the gut, and now they're just bleeding profusely as they're making their way through the dungeon.
Well, I like the idea of a pit trap. That just sounds fun. And let's stick that on the other side of the magical crystal puzzle. That way they're good and weak when they finally hit the stairs to the sanctum when they're going to face us.
Yeah, that's pretty good. What is the trigger for it? How do they set it off?
Oh, we're going with a good old tripwire. Yeah. We talked about doing an illusion over it, but we're not getting along so well with people that can do that kind of magic, and Rage's kobolds are useless for that stuff.
So as they hit the tripwire, it just it goes like ka-chunk, like that, and opens up.
Just drops out from under them. Yes.
Cool. All right, Rach, put a trap down somewhere.
All right. I think I'm going to put a fire trap in the library because I definitely have a fire motif. And you know what burns? Books. We don't necessarily need those books. Not if the adventurers find a use for them.
All right, that's cool. What's the trigger for it? How do they set it off?
Oh, obviously sound, because it's a library.
Okay. That's pretty good. I like it. There's imps in your dungeon, right? And imps are these little demonic creatures, although they can be anything. The players describe that. And what the imps do is they allow you to hand wave a lot of stuff. right? So, Rich, earlier you were talking about this huge, heavy object, right?
Uh-huh.
I don't think the PCs move that. Maybe the imps are moving that for you, right? They're like pushing it around. In this library, maybe there's like an imp librarian that's like shushing people.
Okay.
They're exceptionally loud. Set the place on fire.
Yeah, you can use these to kind of decorate your scenes. They give you permission to like throw these little like demonic creatures anywhere to make stuff make sense when it might not otherwise.
Cool.
Cool. We got our trap set up. Let's do a couple of creatures. What creatures are? They're not intelligent, so they're not like PCs. They could be monsters like the gelatinous cube, or like a huge snake, or a swarm of bats, a scorpion, a ghost, or something. I want you to choose a creature, and then each creature has 2 descriptors that tell like a little bit about them. So like, for example, it's like it's a big snake, but the big snake is incorporeal, right? It can actually kind of turn into a ghost, and it's also, let's say, terrifying, so it's incredibly scary. And then later when you roll, those couple of descriptors will help you describe the scene better. Yeah, let's start with Rach. In this little room, it's like a cavern. What do you think's in there?
Swarming, oozing bats.
Okay.
They drip and they swarm, and it's disgusting.
What's the ooze?
I think the ooze is magical backlash that we've collected from the kobolds' early attempts at magic and then fed to these bats, so it's infected them.
That's good.
It's probably nasty, corrosive stuff. It's like a poison we formed.
That's cool. Rich, you're going to be next. There's a creature right up here in the fountain area, or right beside the fountain. There's a little cavern there. What is that creature?
I think rabid squirrels.
Rabid squirrels.
Rabid squirrels, they are clever and terrifying.
That is terrifying. How are they clever? Like, in what way? What kind of things do they do?
They're clever in that they've devised several things they can do with the nuts and other things they've gathered.
Cool, cool. You might have noticed there's also a gigantic spider right here. This is a neutral creature. It doesn't like you, but it doesn't hate you. It's not aggressive to you, but don't go near it. It acts as another creature in your dungeon. That came up via discovery. While you were digging out there, you found this huge creature lair. All right. I think that kind of covers everything. We got some locks, we got some traps, we got some creatures, and now we're going to run through a dungeon invasion. So, like, you guys can see that over here, we got a halfling slinger. This little halfling, he has a sling, and a big barbarian dude with a gigantic sword, and then a druid, right? And they're going to be making their way into your dungeon and traipsing through it. At the very beginning, I need you both to make a 1D roll, and this is a placement roll to see where your minions are, where they start off. So let's go ahead and have that roll.
I got a 1.
I got a 3.
Okay, that's terrible. Those are both failures. So your minions start off in the worst situations you could imagine them in. They're compromised, or they have no idea what's happening. They're not going to be near the action. So, Rich, where are your orcs? What are they doing?
My orcs are at the Glowshroom Cavern because, you can get high off those.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So they're in there enjoying the glow shrooms.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
Their lips are glowing.
Yeah, and the way this works is that you're not aware that you're under invasion. And you're not going to be aware until the GM determines that it makes sense. But until that point, you're just enjoying the mushrooms.
Okay.
Yeah. You might go this entire defense and not be able to do anything. Right? So, like, the placement roll put you in this kind of compromised situation. Rach, where are your kobolds at?
The obvious answer to me is they're messing around at the bottom of the lava fall.
Yep, that is obvious, isn't it? And incredibly dangerous.
They're kobolds. They're not very smart.
What are they doing?
They are taking the lava that's cooled down because it's fallen into the water, and they're making like little lava castles.
That's great. All right, let's go ahead and jump in here. So the GM only rolls dice to determine the pathing of the adventurers. Yeah, so like instead of the GM just deciding, the dice kind of tell which way they go. Your dungeon here is, the entrance is underneath this kind of broken ancient bridge that's spanning a river, and there's just a little door that you guys have dug out under that. And these 3 adventurers, the barbarian, the halfling, and the druid, they kind of duck in and head inside. What does your dungeon smell like? What smell greets them?
It must smell like mold.
Mm-hmm.
This place is wet, isn't it? Ugh.
Pretty wet, yeah, with the river.
Those poor books in the library.
It's like wet, and oddly, they smell sulfur too from the lava flow, and like lots of burning and smoke. They're like, it's really damp and moist. And is that smoke? Yeah. They move inside. And as they encounter the first branch off of pathways, they're looking down one way, and that's the cavern that goes to the mushroom, the glow shroom cavern. It's this long cavern that's full of these kind of glowing mushrooms. And the orc brawlers are in there enjoying the mushrooms right now. And they're kind of looking down there like, maybe check that out. And they kind of look over the other way. And to their right is a large cavern that's just dark, I think, inside. And that's where your swarming, oozing bats are waiting. Rach, which way do you want them to go?
I mean, I really do want them to encounter Rich's orcs. Stoned as they might be.
Yeah, it's a good idea. They do. They go that way. They go the way I rolled a success. So they go the way that you want them to. That's very nice. They kind of head inside. This barbarian, he's taking the lead. They're moving through these caverns, looking at it. And I think they are going to spot the orcs before the orcs spot them. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and use... Adventurers have moves. What's going to happen here is they see your orcs doing stuff with mushrooms. What are they doing right now?
They're lying on their backs, playfully arguing about mushroom clouds and what they look like.
As you're doing that, you hear a clang, like ka-dong, like that, and the orcs kind of look at each other, and then they look over, and they see the barbarian reaching down and picking up one of your axes, and then he's standing over you, and he goes, "Looks like you dropped something," and he's about to cleave you in half.
Oof.
What do you do?
Clumsily roll out of the way while the one who still has an axe maybe tries to cover for him?
Yeah, what's your intention here? What do you want to accomplish?
Kill the barbarian?
So moving out of the way of this, it's going to be dire, right? Dire means desperate in Wicked Ones.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be dire. If you fail, he's probably just going to cut you in half, like I said. I think you're also going to have limited effect here. Only one of you have an axe, so the effect is going to be weak, right? So let's go ahead and...
Okay.
You want to follow up with that? Does that sound okay?
Sounds okay. I'd like to ask for a devil's bargain, because I've heard you're good at those, Ben.
Yeah, let's see. I got 2 for you. Looking over here at this other part of your dungeon, it looks like you have a prison, and inside of the cells, there's a giant, a fairy, and a dwarf. The devil's bargain is I'll make a 1d roll. On a failure, the giant gets out, and he's going to be wandering around. He's probably not happy at you guys. Probably the best situation is just that fairy gets out, right? So randomly, one of these 3 will escape right now. That's one.
Sounds awesome. Yeah, I like that one. What's the other?
The spider leaves its lair and starts wandering.
Yeah, no, I'll go with the prison escapee. Thank you.
Cool. Let's see. Roll real fast. Yeah, that giant's getting out. I guess eventually the giant had been sitting in this cage, and then he realized, he's like, wait a minute, I'm a giant. And then he stands up and just bowls through the door. And it echoes throughout the dungeon. All right, you can take your plus 1d. What action are you going to be using here?
Well, these are orc brawlers, so I think taking the action of smash makes the most sense to me.
Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and see your roll. Like I said, it's dire, and you're not going to have much effect even if you get a success. I think it's definitely limited here. That's 2d plus your 1d, so you roll 3d.
All right. And my best die is a 4.
Mixed. Here's what's going to be the consequence. One of your orc brawlers is going to be cut in half, and you're going to become bloodied. Bloodied is similar to harm. It means you take minus 1d on subsequent rolls.
Okay.
So, and that's representing one of the orcs getting cut in half here. Yeah, that's the consequence. On the plus side, you do hit this guy, right? And you're going to be slashing away at one of his hearts. Now, I want you to describe that scene for me. What does that all look like?
I think we'll call them Abba and Zabba. Zabba did not have his axe, and Abba goes the opposite way, grabs the axe. The barbarian cleaves Zabba in twain, and Abba comes up and slices him across right in the back. A nice little backstab. Nice little hack in the back there.
Cool. Yeah, he takes it right across his back, and then right behind him, you see that slinger, and he's got this sling going like crazy over his head, and he's about to peg you in the head. What do you do?
That sounds like a bad thing. Let's run off to the river.
You're just going to escape?
Yeah.
Retreat!
It's not a bad idea. You know what? If you manage to make it to the river, I'm going to say that the kobolds are going to notice you.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Are you running across the bridge?
Well, I mean, I'm going to swim towards the bridge eventually.
What's your intention in the end here? You want to get up to that bridge?
Yeah, I want to get to the bridge and try to get them along the path that we'd originally planned, except a little bit further ahead.
Do you want them to follow you?
Yeah. I want to fake like I'm running away, but hopefully get them on track where our Wicked One's bosses have set up things.
Yeah,
So
what
trick.
action are you rolling? Trick, yeah. You have 1 in that, but you're taking minus 1d from being bloodied. So this is going to be a 0d roll.
2D, and I'll take the worst. I rolled a 4 and a 3, so that'll be a fail.
Yeah, that's a failure. Tell me how you die.
So Abba forgot that he can't really swim that well.
Oh no!
Okay.
So, yeah, he sinks like a stone.
Yeah, I have this like image of the Cobalt Pyromancers, and like they're maybe over there doing their kind of, lava castles or whatever, and they're like, wait a minute, and then they thought they heard something, and they turn around and look, and then he's already sunk. They're like, no, it was nothing.
There's a splash! No one's there!
The barbarian is going to turn around now, and they're going to head back. Right? They kind of see that water and they think, nope, we're not going that way. And they kind of come back. And they're going to encounter those oozing bats as they make their way into that dark cavern.
As they walk into that cavern, there's like the noise of dripping coming from the ceiling, almost like, the condensation from all of the water in the atmosphere. And our heroes probably look up and notice that it's actually goo dripping from bats.
Good. Make a roll. It's 2D.
5 and a 3.
What that means is that you're going to damage an adventure of the GM's choice, but the bats are out of the scene now. I'm going to say that they're going to hit that druid. I think the druid's going to be the one that notices something's weird, his connection with nature maybe. So can you tell me what it looks like?
I think the druid is the one who realizes he holds his hand out, probably curious about like this water, and then the goo drips in through his hand and it just burns right through.
Okay, that's cool. That hits his hand and he looks up and he's like, bats! And they start just swarming around, and then he raises his staff and he casts a spell and thorns fly out of it. And they're just like hitting some of the bats, and then they leave. They take another circle and they fly out the entrance of the dungeon. They're just taking off. They'll be back eventually, but they're gone for now.
We'll lure them back with food after we clean up these adventurers.
Where do you want them to go next, Rich? They're looking at this rope bridge, and then they're looking at that big old iron door, and then the barbarian's like, all right, let's do this. And Rich, go ahead and make a roll for that door to see how effective it is.
All right, here we go. 2D. One of these is a 6.
Ooh.
Yeah, it really, really works. So he like hits the door, and tell me what happens.
I think he hits the door and the rock holds, and then the door falls back on him.
And then there's still the rock there.
Yeah, there's still the rock there.
Yeah, boom, and he's under it. Now the druid is stepping up, and it's like, here, let me try. And eventually they push through doors, but they keep trying. And what this is doing, it's ticking off their moves. So they're like blowing moves, right? So the halfling slinger is going to blow one of his moves here, and like looking at it, and like the big rock, and he's like, wait, and he takes his sling, and he goes, bink, and like hits the rock with his rock, and then this huge boulder just goes and crumbles in half. And the barbarian's sitting there like, I cannot believe that just happened. And then they head in. They move their way around the corner, and they're going to be moving into the library where a fire trap awaits them. Rach, can you give me a 2D roll to see how effective that fire trap is?
One of those is a 6.
Awesome. What that means is it's going to hit one of them of your choice, and you roll again. So what does it look like?
Oh, it's very clearly the barbarian is complaining about the absurdity of this halfling slinger shattering the rock with a pebble. And that's the sound that triggers this explosion in the library that is full of flammable books.
That makes sense. Who's it going to hit?
Oh, the barbarian.
Yeah, okay. Like, he just gets scorched. He is almost dead now, right? Like, a big fireball, like, blasts him in the face. I need you to roll again to see if you can hit the other guys.
5 is the highest from that one.
All right, it's going to hit one more of my choice. I think it's going to hit that halfling slinger. What happens there? And this is all part of the same scene, right? It's like the fireball is hitting the barbarian, and then while that happens, the halfling also takes a little bit of damage.
To bookend it with the incident at the door, I think the halfling laughs at the barbarian eating this wall of flame, and then a tower of flaming bookshelves falls down on the halfling.
Very
Nice.
cool. Yeah. He's like trapped under this thing. And then the druid rounds the corner. He's like, idiots. And he goes whoosh, and a gust of wind blows through the library, and all the flames go out. He's like, let's move on. And then they head into the prison where a wandering giant awaits them. And that's where we'll stop. That's pretty good.
That was great. Wow. Ben, thank you so much for giving us a taste of Wicked Ones.
Yeah, thanks for playing along.
Ben, thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Yeah.
If our listeners want to follow more of your work online, where can they find you on social media?
I'm on Twitter at Ben Nielsen, BC. You can also go to the website, banditcamp.io. And then from there, we also have Discord, where I'm really active, and we have a pretty big community. So anyone wants to hop on, try to find a game or whatever, they can do that. I might also say, just real fast, that Wicked Ones has a free edition with about 95% of the content. So anyone that's even a little bit interested, go to DriveThruRPG and download the game. It has really awesome art by Victor Costa. He did all the art in the book, and I'm amazed by how great it is. So you should enjoy that too. Anyone can grab a copy and check it out.
Awesome. Thanks again, Ben, for coming on Plus One Forward and helping us learn a bit more about Forged in the Dark games.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at +1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Drowning Attitude. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.
Can you hear the footsteps in the shadows? Can you smell the metal tang of blood on the air? Can you feel the veil between worlds slipping away with each heartbeat? The Between is here. The Between is a tabletop role-playing game about a group of mysterious monster hunters in Victorian-era London. These hunters learn about monsters and killers throughout the city and conduct investigations in order to neutralize them. Over time, they become aware of the plans of a criminal mastermind who is pulling the strings behind the scenes. They will eventually be forced to confront this mastermind in order to save Queen and Country. The Between is directly inspired by the TV show Penny Dreadful, but also takes inspiration from British horror classics, the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, pulp-era media, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and from Hell. It's powered by the Apocalypse and uses the mystery system from our hit game Brindlewood Bay. The Between comes with a 129-page rulebook, 7 playbooks, 10 scenarios or threats, a mastermind campaign sheet, reference sheets, and a supplement called London at Night, The Unseen. The Between PDF is available now on the Gauntlet Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/gauntlet. The Between will be available on DriveThruRPG starting June 14th.